I once had the opportunity to travel around the country. It was the summer of 2017. Not only did I need to be in Los Angeles for 2 weeks for my summer graduate training, but I was also going to be spending 2 weeks in Seattle. Furthermore, a few friends of mine had been living in San Francisco at the time, and I wanted to be sure to visit them since I was going to be on the West Coast anyway. So I hatched a plan. Rather than flying to my destinations, I decided to take a train across the country. In all, my trip would take me over a month. I would spend almost 5 days and 5 nights traveling on various trains. And so my journey began. I took a train from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to Chicago, where I spent time seeing the city and visiting my uncle who lives there. Then I spent 3 days and 3 nights on a train going from Chicago to Los Angeles. In those 3 days, I saw the mighty Mississippi River, the Great Central Plains, the Rocky Mountains, the desert plateaus of Arizona, and the Sierra Nevada mountains. I spent almost every waking moment in the observation car, taking in the incredible beauty and diverse landscapes around me. Once in LA, I spent the next 2 weeks in my summer graduate training courses. Sure, it was school, but I took time in the evenings to go sightseeing and spend time with friends. Once my time in LA came to an end, I boarded a train and took off to San Francisco. That was a much shorter train ride, but traveling along the coast was still quite beautiful. After spending 4 days with friends in San Francisco, I got back on a train and headed north to Seattle. There I spent 2 weeks seeing the sights and getting to know the city. The final stretch of the trip was a 6-hour flight back to Philadelphia. I'll never forget walking into my apartment for the first time after spending a month away. It was like stepping back into a place I hadn't known in a long time. Despite only being gone for a month, it had felt like I had wandered the world for years. I didn't know how or in what way, but I felt changed. The person who returned felt different from the person who had left. After returning, I spent the next several days processing all that I had experienced. I looked through photos, organized my videos, and unpacked my luggage. I was so inspired and changed by the journey that I was determined to write it down. As I began writing, however, I couldn't help but feel sad. You see, I had the experience of traveling around the country for a month, but I went alone. I went on my own. Every single experience I had was only experienced by me. And all those experiences fit together like a puzzle to create that life-changing journey. The experiences I had, the stories I could tell, the places I had been, the people I had met, meant something to me. Not only because they were significant on their own, but also, and more importantly, because they were a significant part of a larger story that was only ever understood by me. I realized this as I was desperately trying to fully articulate the weight and meaning of the journey I had been on to my friends and family. No matter how well I tried to craft the story or experiences, I could never quite do them justice. There is a deeper and more authentic and meaningful part of a journey that's experienced in solitude. Suddenly, I found myself wondering if I would have been better off taking someone with me to share it with instead of going alone. Someone to look to when I'm at a loss for how to articulate a story. Someone who knew how incredible the journey really was. The word CISO is a term that broadly captures this very feeling. It's defined as a solitary experience you wish you could have shared with someone else. The 18th and 19th century poet William Wordsworth artfully captures this feeling for us in his work, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, in which William stumbles upon a field of flowers. It goes like this. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. It's only in the final stanza here that we see the larger picture that he's really painting. For oft when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. As I pondered Wordsworth's poem, my eyes fell to the phrase, "the bliss of solitude." I realized then that maybe I had missed something. Maybe I had overlooked just how meaningful and valuable each and every one of those solitary experiences I had really were. Although I wished I could have shared those experiences with another person, Wordsworth's words reminded me that the depths of those experiences which I had in solitude could only ever have been experienced in solitude. In other words, there is an aspect to those experiences that would have been lost if shared with another person. There is value, in other words, in solitude. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard reminds us of this in Sickness Unto Death, which is a cheerful book about despair. But on the subject of solitude, however, he writes this: "Generally, the need of solitude is a sign that there is a spirit in a man after all, and it is a measure of what spirit there is. The purely twaddling inhuman and too human men are such a degree without feeling for the need of solitude that, like a certain species of social birds, the so-called lovebirds, they promptly die if for an instant they have to be alone. As the little child must be put to sleep by a lullaby, so these men need the tranquilizing hum of society before they are able to eat, drink, sleep, pray, fall in love, etc. But in ancient times, as well as in the Middle Ages, people were aware of the need for solitude and had respect for what it signifies. In the constant sociability of our age, people shudder at solitude to such a degree that they know no other use to put it to but as a punishment for criminals." So you might be wondering, what's the point I'm trying to make here? Why am I talking about taking trips alone and spending time in solitude? The point or lesson I'm trying to make is this: solitude isn't a thing that needs to be fixed. In fact, as a society, we should be intentional about knowing what it is and finding time to experience it. In order to do this, we must understand the difference between solitude and isolation. You see, at its core, solitude is a voluntary retreat of self-reflection and renewal, whereas isolation often implies involuntary separation and loneliness. Solitude, as described by philosopher Paul Tillich, is the glory of being alone, a state where we deliberately embrace quietude to engage deeply with our thoughts and emotions. In contrast, isolation can be a state of deprivation or a sense of disconnection, echoing Hannah Arendt's caution that isolation may deprive an individual of the capacity for meaningful dialogue, thereby diminishing the richness of life, which is an idea that Hannah Arendt explores in her work, The Human Condition. Henry David Thoreau's sojourn at Walden Pond powerfully illustrates solitude's virtues. He famously wrote, "I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude." Thoreau's deliberate solitude, stripped of societal distractions, gave him the space he needed to wrestle with questions about life and existence itself. Moreover, solitude offers a landscape for genuine self-expression, as emphasized by Virginia Woolf in her assertion that a room of one's own is essential for personal and authentic creativity. Woolf understood solitude as a sanctuary for creativity, free from external judgment and the pressures of collective opinion. Yet, solitude should not imply a complete detachment. Martin Buber's philosophy of dialogue highlights that meaningful solitude is always relational, a temporary state that enriches one's ability to engage authentically with others. True solitude refreshes our capacity for genuine interpersonal connection, unlike isolation, which often erodes our sense of empathy and belonging. These ideas on the nature of solitude are similar to the practice of Sabbath rest in my own life. You see, the word Sabbath means to cease or to rest. It primarily refers to the seventh day of the week, a day of rest and cessation from work as commanded by God. It is a holy day set apart for rest and worship, commemorating God's rest after the creation of the world in Genesis 2. Sabbath isn't just a time to do nothing or watch TV. It's a time to recharge your heart, your soul, and your mind. It's a time to disconnect from the distractions, addictions like social media, and the perpetual restlessness that we put ourselves in throughout the week. My wife and I will often begin our Sabbath with prayer and scripture reading. Yes, we often use the time to rest and relax, but we're intentional about ensuring that we differentiate this time of the week from any other. We're intentional about ensuring that it is set apart and wholly different. Because not only does God call us to keep it set apart in Exodus 12, but we also want our brains and our souls to instinctively know when Sabbath has arrived. If our Sabbath looked no different from any other day, then our brains may never know the difference between peace and hurry, or between rest and worry. One of the ways we pursue this goal is through solitude. And maybe that's the quiet beauty of solitude, not in what it lacks, but in what it reveals. In stillness, we begin to hear again. In silence, we begin to see. The Sabbath teaches us this, that rest is not an escape, but a return. A return to ourselves, a return to God, a return to what is unshakably true beneath all of the noise. Solitude is not a punishment, but a sacred pause, a holy hush that reminds us you don't have to be seen to be known. You don't have to speak to be heard. Perhaps that's what makes solitude so sacred. Not just that we're alone, but that silence can have such a powerful impact on our lives. So I'll leave you with this. What if the silence you avoid holds the very answers you've been searching for, or the very questions you've been meaning to ask? The psalmist reminds us, "Be still and know that I am God." May you come to know the sacredness of solitude.